Welcome to the Mindful Pause Podcast, where we talk about all things mental health and service dogs. I'm your host, Laura Mudge, a passionate advocate and handler of a small service dog who's been by my side offering life-saving support through some of the most challenging moments of my life. While I'm not a medical professional, I've experienced firsthand the impact a service dog can have on someone's mental health. And this podcast is the space for sharing stories, insights, and resources. Through conversations with experts, service dog handlers, and mental health advocates, we'll explore this unique bond between humans and their service dogs, and how these animals provide both emotional and practical support. I'm excited to dive into these stories with you, and I hope you leave each episode with a better understanding of the healing powers of our four-legged friends. On today's show, I'm here with Makenzie Lopez. She's a licensed clinical social worker and has been working in mental health for many years. She also has a service dog in training and lives with Trichotillomania and is an advocate for all things mental health. Please welcome Makenzie to the show. Hi. Hi, Makenzie.
Oh.
How are you doing today? Good?
Oh, good, except for the issues trying to get connected. But
we got it working.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about your journey that led you to work in mental health? Because you have been doing it for many years.
I struggled with depression and anxiety, really starting kind of around middle school, high school age. And I was always just very passionate about it. And during that time, it made me feel so alone. And I think as I got older, I wanted other people to not feel the way that I did, which I think is how a lot of therapists get into what they're into, because as a therapist, I have many therapist friends, and almost all of us struggle with our own mental health disorders. And it's because we've been through something or have experienced something. We don't want people to feel the way that we felt, or we want to provide them with the help and support that they need that we didn't get. Yeah. So I think that's kind of what led me into wanting to pursue a career somewhere in mental health. And I didn't know exactly where that was going to end, where I was going to kind of end up. And so I started in community mental health right after my undergrad, just as a case manager, behavioral health case manager. And I did a year of that and figured out what I wanted to go, and then got my master's and kept going. So
that's awesome. That's fantastic. And I love that. I love that is like a pretty common reason to get into that. Because it does, when you do have something going on, that's the first thing. And that's part of the reason why I do the podcast is it's like, you're not alone. You are not alone. There's people out there that are going through something like you're going through. So, and what led you to start working with your own service dog?
Oh, so it's kind of a long story.
That's okay. They usually are.
So my service dog, is actually, so she was born with me. We have a dog that, we got pregnant, and we had family that were lined up. They wanted some of her puppies. She's a Pembroke Corgi.
Okay.
So she, and her whole birth story, there's a whole backstory about that too, but I won't get into that because that's not relevant. So it ended up, she only had one puppy. It was a singleton. And she was kind of just she struggled at birth. She was born early. We had to tube feed, bottle feed, and all of this stuff.
Oh.
And so, yeah, it was rough. So after that, it was like, we were keeping her. Like there was no way.
Bonded.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And so we hadn't had intentions of having another dog because we already have two others. But we kept her. And I knew at that time I was working in community mental health, and I wanted a therapy dog. And I was like, this would be a great opportunity. She's a brand new puppy. I can train her from the beginning. And so I started doing, like, early on, getting her into training classes and doing all of this. And throughout the process, I realized she's a very one person dog, very independent, focused on me. So I sat down and I talked with our trainer, and I was like, do you think this is pursuing her as a therapy dog is actually beneficial to her? She said, well, we can train, a dog to do whatever, but is she going to be happy doing that? Probably not. That's just not her.
Yeah.
I was like, So we decided not to pursue that. But in that whole process, I realized how in tune she was with me. I was her person. Um, and I actually started to see how she was helping me in ways that I didn't even realize.
Yeah.
As we'll kind of maybe get into a little bit more with trichotillomania, it's pulling of the hair, and she would interrupt that, and she would stop me from doing, and it just, and so
Amazing.
yeah, and so I didn't even know that it was a possibility to train her as a service dog at that time. Um, she just kind of naturally was doing all of this, and so I started researching it. And I found some trainers that specifically focused on training service dogs for BFRBs, or body focused repetitive behaviors, which trichotillomania falls under.
Wow.
And so I was like, okay, this is a thing. This is possible. So then I talked to my therapist about it, and she was like, absolutely, let's do this. Like, I think this would help you. So then I went back to my trainer and I said, hey, I think this is something that can help me. And she said, all right, let's do it. And that's kind of where the story started.
That's awesome. And it's great too. Like that's the thing is people don't necessarily think about certain breeds. Like I personally, I have a 5-pound Morkie and she
Well,
helps me with my PTSD and she's like little, right?
yeah.
And so to have a Pembroke Corgi, which by the way, I had as a child as a family dog, and they are the best, most personality. I love those dogs. But to have her as a service dog is so amazing because
Yeah.
that's just really cool, right? You don't think about it's how that dog connects to you and how they can help you, right? Obviously, you're not going to have your Pembroke Corgi, helping you with like mobility things because she's little, but definitely within an interruption of a behavior, that's something that they could totally do. Yeah,
Yes.
but
Absolutely.
that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
How has having her like impacted your overall being, like, and your life? Like, what's the difference? Do you find?
Oh gosh. I feel like there's so many ways. So I mean, essentially she's being trained to stop my body focused repetitive behaviors. However, just through the process and training, um, it's helped my depression so much too. Like it's just like a natural. I think animals are a natural cure. I think they can be very therapeutic. Um, and so, and I mean, I know there are ESAs, and that's completely different. However, I think that naturally there's just that occurrence of it boosts my mood, my serotonin, and I'm feeling
Totally
much better.
does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So I've seen it help my depression. I've seen it help my anxiety. Obviously, trichotillomania. We're still kind of in the process. She is my service dog in training, but
Yes,
I like
exactly.
training because she's not fully completely great on her tasks all yet. But she does a really good job, and so I can already tell the difference. Having her being able to interrupt things that I may not be conscious that I'm doing,
Oh,
um,
totally. Yeah.
helping distract me to keep my hands busy or to do something else. So um, there's just so many ways that she has really benefited me and helped me a lot.
Oh, that's so awesome. I love hearing that. That makes me so happy.
Yeah. Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about trichotillomania and how it affects you and affects like other people and what it is, and what you think people should know about? Because I know I didn't know very much about it when I was looking up what that was.
Yeah. Which is not uncommon. It isn't a very common disorder. And in fact, I honestly didn't know what it was until it happened to me. So trichotillomania is a what people call a hair pulling disorder. Historically, it has been categorized under different things, like in relation to anxiety. It's also been categorized under OCD, or obsessive compulsive disorder. So I think that there is not enough knowledge about it, and probably not enough studies about it, because it does impact such a small population,
Mm,
which I have some statistics on that.
I would love to hear.
Yes, I believe, let me see here. I believe it is about 2% of the population that is impacted by trichotillomania. Most of the times, um, it is early childhood and adolescence, especially adolescents, because they have found the link between trichotillomania and estrogen levels. So,
Interesting.
yes, right.
Yeah.
Um, which I'll come back to that in just a second. But um, for me personally, and I can really only speak to my experience, but for me personally, it didn't show up until my early 20s. So I think I was about 22 when I first started experiencing it. I was going through a lot in my lifetime during that period, so it very well could have been triggered by stress, anxiety, or traumatic experience. So there's a whole lot that can go into it. Um, with hair pulling disorder, it affects people differently, and what I mean by that is, for some people, it can be pulling of the hair, like the actual hair on the top of your head.
Yep.
It can be eyebrows, eyelashes. Those typically tend to be the most common areas, is those three. It can be one and not the other. It can be all three. It can be a combination. For me personally, it's my eyebrows and eyelashes. I have never been a hair puller on the hair on the top of my head. But mine is my eyebrows and eyelashes. Um, I think the biggest thing with trichotillomania, and I talked about how, it's more common and more reported for children.
Hmm.
I've questioned that a lot, simply because I don't know if it's reported more because when they're children, it's the parents who are kind of saying, "Hey, this is and it's more reported," right?
Yeah.
When you're an adult, there's so much shame and guilt around because it can be embarrassing to admit, to talk about, because it's something visible, right? And we're in a society that's all about beauty and looks.
Hmm.
And so it can be hard to admit as an adult. So I mean, we do know that it's very underreported. So the actual amount of people affected is probably much greater than what the statistics we actually have.
Hmm.
Um, but I wonder, though, with the idea, is it really more prevalent in children, or is it just so much underreported in adults that it may be about the same? Um,
That's true. That's absolutely true. Yeah, especially if it's an estrogen linked situation, because as we, go through different stages in our life, especially as women and even as men, those hormones can change for many, many reasons, and could possibly trigger something like that if you're susceptible to it, I would think.
mhm,
And again, like you're talking about the shame of it. And this is why I love talking about stuff like this, because, there shouldn't be shame. It's like anything else with your body, right? Like it's just part of it.
yes. And I think I did say estrogen, but I believe it's progesterone.
Oh,
That,
progesterone. Okay, well,
yeah,
same thing.
that's
Same
my
thing as
fault. But
progesterone. Okay.
yeah, that's my fault, my misspeak. But and on that topic too, though, I mean, I personally have really noticed that. So for me, I can go long periods of time, sometimes, without having an episode. And every time that it does happen, I notice that it's correlated with my cycle.
Mhm.
So it's either right before or during, so it's at my peak. So it very much so. There are other things that play into it.
Oh,
It's not
totally.
absolutely so.
Well, that's really fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. That's really really cool.
Yeah,
I've never heard that. It's really well explained.
yeah.
Um, and what do you think we could like do to get rid of the stigma when it comes to trichotillomania and other mental health disorders? Like, how do we break this cycle of the shame and the like, just people? Yeah, how
Yeah.
do we break that?
Oh, that's such a hard question to answer. But I do think education and knowledge, like just getting things out there, talking about it. I think that's the most important thing. It's so hard, how do we break this stigma? Because I think there will always be a little bit of a stigma, simply because when we're talking about like anxiety and depression, it literally part of that disorder is making you feel so isolated, making you feel
Mhm.
like you are alone, and making you feel like nobody cares or whatever. So I think it will always be a little bit harder to break the stigma just because of how the disorders function themselves. However, I do think talking about it, I think being open about it, educating people about what these are. One of my biggest things with, I think with any type of what I call body focused repetitive behaviors, which can be things like hair pulling, the trichotillomania. It can be skin picking, scratching. It's a body focused behavior that is repetitive.
Yeah.
So anything like that, I think, is really hard to talk about for some people, because when you talk about it with people who maybe don't understand or don't know, their response can be, I've experienced this, well, just stop. Just don't do it. And it's so
Like,
much.
just get over it. It's like,
Yeah.
it's infuriating.
And so I think that part about educating people that it's not that simple. I mean,
Mhm.
it's not like I can just stop what I'm doing. There's so much more behind it that my brain is doing, that my body is doing, um, that it's just not as simple as, oh yeah, oh, okay, yeah, I'll just stop tomorrow. And never, yeah, I wish that was how it worked, but it's not. It's so much harder than that. So I think when we get to a place where people understand that and they can listen, fully listen, and not have the judgment, I think then we can talk. We're in a place where we can talk about it more. And then we're in a place where that stigma can kind of break down, if that makes sense.
Totally does. That was a lovely answer. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you're totally right when you're talking about that, because people, if you're not experiencing it, like if you don't experience what someone else is going through, it doesn't matter what it is. But when it comes to mental health, because it's like in your brain, like PTSD, for instance, it's like it's changed my brain, right? Other disorders, that's part of your brain. That doesn't mean that there's something you're a defect of a person. It
Right.
doesn't mean any of that. It's not related to your self-worth. And I think that part of that stigma is like you even put it on yourself a little bit when you get a diagnosis or you're working through something like depression or anything, because you're just like, well, I'm defective. There's like, I'm broken. But you wouldn't be like that if you just broke your arm,
Yep.
right? You
Yep.
wouldn't
Yep.
be like that if you just broke your arm. So, like, it has nothing to do with your self worth.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing. And that's something that's really hard to get to a place where you're like, nothing to do with my self worth. I'm still amazing. Right.
Right.
So that
Absolutely.
kind of contributes to that like stigma, because the people who are inflicted don't talk about it. And as you were talking about the trichotillomania, I think you could be quite right with that, is like, because they're, in their adulthood, they're going to be like, well, I don't do anything weird. Like I'm fine and just tra la la, right? Right. Right. Because they don't want to feel that. So what do you think service dogs and animals can help with like that treatment of some things? Like, do you think that there's a benefit? I know there's ESAs, which are different than service dogs. Do you think that that helps take away some barriers for people if they are getting a service dog?
I think we don't have enough psychiatric service dogs. I think there should be more, because I think they can be so beneficial. The difference between ESAs and service dogs, right? Service dogs task trained. Um, I don't think that I think ESAs are great. I do. Because I do think, like I talked about before, I do think animals just in general can provide so much um, emotional support. I think they can be very therapeutic. But with task trained, it just brings another level. Like, for example, with anxiety, um, being able to calm that anxiety. So my service dog has also, I think just naturally started to recognize when my anxiety is really high, because suddenly we'll be somewhere and I'm feeling anxious, but I'm not really paying attention to it, but I feel a boop on my leg. And I'm
Yep.
like, so but then not only that, not only bring the alert, alerting me to, so that I can pay attention to my body, instead of just pushing it down and suppressing it and trying to ignore it and just working through it. Now I'm aware, and I can take the steps that I need to center myself, to bring myself back, whether that's, okay, let's go outside, get some fresh air. I'll take you to the bathroom. But I will say, because we're talking about this, and I don't know, maybe more people know about this than I do, but I definitely don't feel like I knew about this a lot. When I started training, when I first started doing her public access training, which we didn't start till she was already a year and a half old before we even started her. And at that point, I did not realize how much my anxiety would heighten when I first started taking her out. You're shaking your head, yes.
Yeah, I'm shaking my head, yes. I understand that, and I still struggle with it.
Yeah.
Like, I have my dog mostly came to work with me, and we did other things, like, but I had like a bad, like, down road, and then trying to get her back out again, doing public access. So yeah, no, I get it. It's like people are looking at you, they're looking at your dog. You're like, they're all judging me, and they probably aren't. But that's where your brain is going. And you're like, what if she messes up? What if I mess up?
Yes.
What's going on? How do I deal with this? So yeah. So the anxiety, like when you first start doing it, kind of like definitely does a little bit more. And you kind of have to push yourself to go do the public access stuff. But I can tell you, it does get better. Because once you start building confidence, not only in yourself handling the dog, but the dog doing the things the dog's supposed to do, and then you can trust them.
Yes.
Right. So it's like building that trust between you two. It's a whole thing. And then that helps the anxiety. But before then it's like, I'm still not taking her to restaurants because I'm just like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. I'm working on it, but just like little tiny bits because it's,
Yeah, I'm so glad that we're having this conversation because I personally, I didn't realize that. And when I started taking, I felt like a helicopter mom. Like I just not watch her like everywhere we went. Cause I'm like, are you sniffing other people? Are you going to go to the bathroom? And I just was anxious about everything. And then not only that, you probably have experience with this too, having a small dog, a small quote unquote cute dog.
Yes.
Also brings another layer to it because everyone wants to, oh my goodness, look at that cute little corgi. Look at, da da da.
Yep.
And so people are paying attention, people are watching it. Anyways, it's a lot. And I wanted to touch on that simply because, again, I was not aware that my anxiety would really, really increase in the beginning. I'm at a point now where I can say I'm on the other side, right? She's still training. We still have our off days or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I think that regardless.
That's normal.
Yeah. But, my trainer, she was finally like, you have got to trust her. Like she knows what she's doing. You have got to trust her. And so I finally kind of like started to like, okay, I don't have to watch you. I don't have to have my eyes on you all the time. Like I can trust that you're in a perfect heel. You're going to follow and I'm at a point now where I'm feeling better, but I wish I had known going in more that was going to happen because it almost completely dissuaded me from doing the whole thing. I like, no, this isn't worth it. Not if my anxiety is going to be high like this for forever. But again, another conversation with my trainer, and she was like, this is normal. It's going to get better. And she was right. And so I just wanted to touch on that piece too. When talking about training psychiatric service dogs, if it's a self-train, I think just being aware that it is pretty, I don't like the word normal. I keep saying normal, but it is not uncommon for anxiety to heighten simply because yes, you haven't built that trust yet, but I can say being on the other side and talking to other people who are on the other side, that does go away because you build a relationship with your working dog and it does get better. So I'm sorry if I got a little bit off topic.
No, not at all. That's really important to talk about because that's the thing too, is people are like, oh, you have the service dog, you're good now. Go, right. Be free, go public access. And it's like, yeah, okay, the dog's worked with me and the trainer walking around the store. And the first time I did that, I had like 5 people try to touch her when I was with the trainer, right? Because it's like, oh, cute doggy. It's like, okay, one thing that is good about a small service dog is if they are in their perfect heel, and you can just kind of quietly sneak in somewhere. Nobody knows the dog is there. Because she's so little that they're like, oh, I've gone up to cashiers and they're like, why are you wearing a leash? Like, because they can't see her because she's on the floor in between the counter and me. And that's fantastic. I love those moments, but it's not when you walk into a store that's like you're on parade. It's almost like, so yeah, no, that's a really good thing to talk about because definitely it happens for sure. And it goes in cycles too. Like if I'm having a rough time, I might be like, oh, this is too much for me today. Right. Yeah. But now I'm learning to trust her because my dog is out fine for public access right now. And she's done, but she's not completely certified yet just because we had like an incident at my workplace. So we're working through some of that trauma. And she's doing great with it. And it hasn't been an issue. It's more my trauma than hers. But I'm just taking it slow before I go and get like completely certified, but she is up and ready to go. It's a whole thing. Yeah. It's a process, right? It's not simple. You're not just perfectly ready. And I know in Canada, I have to go through a certification test. So you're in the States, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So you don't have to do that.
No. Yeah. Yes, you're right. We don't have any specific testing. However, the training program I'm going through, they do have testing that we have to do. So like they have to pass all their CGCs. And then we have our final public access training test.
That's perfect. That's awesome.
So I actually like it. I like that because I know that she's going to be held to a standard of like, she has to meet these before I know she's ready.
Yeah.
So as much anxiety as doing the test may bring me a little bit because I'm like, do well. I actually appreciate that they're having us go through that. And we actually have several people that still come to our group classes that have already done and passed the test, but they're staying for maintenance because you're absolutely right. I mean, there's going to be off days, and no matter how much, even after they've passed their final tests, it's still good to do maintenance and
you're never not training. Like if you stop training, then you're that it doesn't happen. You're always training, always trying to get something else going on. So, since you work in the mental health field, when someone gets a diagnosis of a disability or mental health condition, what do you suggest? Like, what advice would you give them kind of navigating through that?
Well, to be honest, a lot of times when this may sound silly, but a lot of times when people come into therapy, they already know something's off. Like they already know, they know that there's something going on. They just can't put a name to it. And so sometimes when we're able to put a name to it, and it helps them not feel alone. Hey, you're not the only one going through this. There are other people that also go through this. You're not quote unquote crazy. Hate that word too.
I hate that word. Yeah.
It's, this is something that's very real that other people experience. And I think just having, again, there's that stigma, right? We don't talk about it, and that's why people don't know about it. But I think just by breaking down that barrier in the beginning is very helpful. But I think, again, what do I say to them, and how do we approach this? I think it is really just putting a name to it. I think it's talking about it. I think it's validating what that person is experiencing or has experienced in life, because a lot of people don't get that. They don't get that validation. And so I think once we can do that, that opens barriers for them to then be open with me or be open with their therapist. They feel they can trust that person now and can be open and honest with them. And I think that's where the process really begins is once we can let those barriers down and talk openly about these things.
Totally. Yeah. I think that's, you touched on a lot of things there. But I think that's true. Like when I got my PTSD diagnosis, I actually got it when I was quite young, because it was all childhood stuff. And I was kind of like, yeah, whatever. And I just ignored it. Tra-la-la. Same with my dyslexia and ADHD. It was just like, forget it. Right. and just kind of work through it. I'm fine, whatever. And then as I got to an adult and I was re-diagnosed again, relatively recently when I was trying to go through the process of getting a service dog. My family doctor wanted me to, but also wanted me to go to a psychiatrist. And when I did that, and that person wasn't very good at breaking the news to me. So that was difficult. But at the same time, having that, it's like, okay, yeah, it's just, it might not ever go away. I might not ever work through all of this. And that's okay.
Yeah.
I can learn to live with it. Right. So that's the thing. Right. And some of those diagnoses is that fact. It's like, this is just going to be part of your life and will help you learn tools and just work through it. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you kind of touched on this earlier about, it's different. I think you mentioned like breaking your arm or breaking your leg, it's, I think one of my favorite, analogies is comparing it to somebody who has diabetes. Right. And so I think in the sense of like, when we have diabetes and we need insulin, it's the same thing with mental health. If we have a mental health diagnosis, we may need these things. We may need medication. We may need continuing therapy or, whatever tools that we need. But at the end of the day, we didn't ask for this. Nobody asked for these diagnoses. We didn't ask for these things to happen to us, and we had no control over it.
Mm-hmm.
It's literally something that our brains and our bodies do, and they have. And so there's no shame in that. There's no shame in something that isn't within our control. I didn't choose to be, or experience clinical depression. I didn't choose anxiety. Those things are just, they're a part of me, but they're not who I am as a person.
Exactly. So. That is nail right on the head there. Yeah, totally. They're part of me, but they're not who I am as a person. Yeah. So what advice would you give to someone who is like newly diagnosed with trichotillomania? Because that's something like maybe again, they like something's weird, like something's going on here. I have this compulsion and I cannot stop. But they get the diagnosis and then they're like, then what?
Right. So I think the first thing, again, validation, and reassurance that it's breaking down the walls of shame and guilt and all of that. But letting them know that there is courses of treatment. It may be something, ideally we want to work it to a point where it's no longer an issue. But some people do struggle with it all of their lives. But there is treatment. I know that there are medications that have helped some people, but also types of therapy like cognitive behavioral therapy, focusing on those, the body-focused repetitive behavior treatment approaches can really be beneficial for a lot of people. When I talked about trichotillomania a little bit, I think one of the biggest components to it that I didn't touch on is that there's kind of like two different paths or two different routes, and it can be one or the other. It can be both. And that is mindlessly doing it. So doing it without thinking about it. We're not conscious of it. It's just kind of happening. And then there's a part where it's like, it is like more the obsessive compulsive, like, oh my gosh, I have to pull this out. There's so much anxiety around it. And so for me, I do experience both of those. I have my triggers, like there's my places, like in my home, if I'm sitting down at TV where I might start mindlessly pulling. And again, that's where my service dog training can come in and help me and alert me. And well, this is what I'm doing.
Oops.
I'm doing.
I didn't realize. Yeah.
But there's also that there's times where it is so disruptive to my life that I can't go to sleep because, especially when for me, when my eyelashes are growing back in, I can feel them there, when they first start prickly and they maybe itch and they hurt and I can feel them. And it is so disruptive to my entire day. I mean, for growing them out is the hardest thing. And so it's so disruptive to the point where I can't fall asleep until I get them all out, or I can't do this next thing until they're gone because I can feel them and I don't like that feeling. And it's so, and that anxiety, if I don't do it right now, if I don't get rid of this right now, this uncomfortable feeling, then I can't move on with my day, which is how trichotillomania people don't think of it as being super disruptive to a daily life, but it very much so can be.
Yeah. That sounds really rough. That's just not good.
Yeah.
I'm
It's
glad
not,
I'm
it's
glad you have your service job helping you out with that a little bit, but I feel for you there. I could feel that. I was just like, "Oh, I get what you're saying."
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think, sorry, I kind of got sidetracked again,
That's
but
okay.
your original question of what would I tell them? I think it is just reassurance that, hey, you're not alone. That, this is a thing. There's a name for it. Other people experience it. You're not the only person. I think just that reassurance that I'm not alone. And then that there is treatment options. I think when people who are suffering with whatever it is that they're suffering with, it's can feel hopeless. And when there's that opportunity for hope, hey, there's treatment. Yes, you may live with this for the rest of your life, but we're going to learn to manage those symptoms. We're going to learn to work together to where it's not as disabling, or it's not as crippling as it once was. I think that hope is what keeps people going. It's the hope that keeps them coming back for treatment. And yeah, so I think it's a combination of all of those things, and bringing that to that person when they first get that diagnosis. Now that I'm talking about it out loud, yeah, I think hope is the biggest thing, is providing that.
I would agree. I think hope, like in my journey, there's been moments where I haven't had hope. And, that second diagnosis not broke to me properly and not given me any treatment options at the time was quite horrible, horrific for myself because I didn't have hope. I was like,
Right.
I
Yeah.
I'm going to feel like this forever and I can't feel like this anymore. And I'm asking for help and you're not going to help me. Right. And that can happen, unfortunately. And, hopefully that isn't, too common of an experience. But once I found the right therapist and I found a trauma therapist, then I was able to kind of a lot more optimistic. She's like, no, 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 we can work through this stuff. We can
Yeah.
help you, deal and work through it. So that was great. But that's the thing there. It's hope is key. And there's always a solution, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
To like most things, there's always a solution. And sometimes you have to look really hard for it. But there is a solution. So to have hope. So if you get a
Yeah.
diagnosis, just have hope. Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's a very good.
Yeah.
We were talking before too, and you're like, there should probably be a lot more psychiatric service dogs. So,
Yeah.
how do you think that could be more of a recognized part of a mental health treatment?
Oh gosh. So honestly, as someone who's a therapist, I think I think I didn't have the education I probably needed around. Now I know there are opportunities for those types of education, but I think I wish I would have known more about it before, everything, before I was in it and knew it.
Yeah.
So I think educating our mental health professionals a little bit more about how beneficial they can be, um, I think is a first step, is a start. Because again, I didn't know prior. I didn't know how beneficial they could be. So I think that's a first start. I think the more people see and realize, again, I guess this all ties back to education, as I talked
Yeah,
about.
it does. It's all education, right? Yeah.
But so as a provider, I think it's educating more providers that, hey, this is a thing. This can very much so be beneficial, to our patients, to our clients. But also as an individual who struggles with mental health, I think seeing other people having psychiatric service dogs,
Yeah.
and then realizing, hey, that's a thing and that's okay. And actually that could really help me. Um, I think is the key piece. So there's two parts, as the professionals, I think we need to educate them more that this could be a part of their treatment plan. I was never really educated in that, of how beneficial they could be as a provider. So I think as providers, we need that more education, but then just as on the individual, seeing it and, in real time. You hear so much about medical service dogs, being able to help with diabetes or seizure alert or cardiac. Those are really common. People know about those. People don't know much about psychiatric service dogs. So again, just education, getting out there, and that knowledge to both sides, I think, could open a lot of doors for people who really need them. Because I know so many people that would benefit from them that don't have them or don't have access to them. That's another one.
Yeah, that's another part of it too, is being able to, access programs, access self-training programs, even if you're self-training yourself. Like, I know in my area, there was I got rejected from a bunch of them because they're like, oh no, we don't do small service dogs. No, it has to be golden retriever or blue. Yeah. And PTSD, if you're not a veteran or first responder, it's like you don't qualify for the program. So luckily I found a school that does multitasking, like trains in multitasks. So I was able to work with that, and they had trained small dogs before with success. So that was very lucky. But there's not necessarily a lot of programs. So there's barriers, and then financial barriers, and all those too. Your health has to be at a certain spot too, to kind of go through all the process. There's a lot of, in Canada, there's a lot of red tape to get doctor's notes and things like that. Go through all that. And I was just lucky my doctor suggested it, to be honest. I would never have gone down the service dog path. But I was so desperate for something. I was like, I can't keep feeling like this, and I can't keep managing my symptoms this way. It's not working. And we had literally tried everything. And it was like, why not try a service dog? And then that's been probably the best prescription.
Yeah.
But I think it takes, the doctors don't necessarily, I'm lucky that it was a relatively, doctor who knew about service dogs and was, knew that they had psychiatric service dogs. Because I don't think a lot of doctors do know that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I can't speak to in Canada, but here in the US, can be a fight, like a struggle for a lot of individuals to have doctors write notes for a service dog. Mm-hmm. I've seen many people that struggle with that when they go in and the doctors are like, they don't know and I think it's a lack of education. They don't know. And so they don't want to write the letters, or they'll want to write them, but they'll just do for an ESA, which again, right, is different. Mm-hmm. And so, so I completely understand. And I'm so grateful and glad that you had a good doctor that knew what they were talking about.
Me too. I love that woman. She's great. So, literally saved my life, that girl, I think, because my dog has saved my life, So it's one of those things. Any final thoughts today at all, Makenzie?
Oh, goodness. I think my final thoughts would just be that if you are struggling with trichotillomania, or if you're struggling with any mental health disorder, you are not alone. We've said that a lot today, but you're not alone. There is hope. A service dog may or may not benefit you. If you're listening or watching this and you don't have one, do some research. It may, talk to a therapist or talk to your doctor about it. I mean, it may be something that benefits you. And it may not, and that's okay either way. But just know that there can be, I think, for me as a service dog is kind of like an alternative medicine to alternative treatment plan, let's say, that people don't think about or don't know enough about. And it may just be the right treatment plan for you. So I think just taking that time, talk to the people you need to, know you're not alone, and advocate for yourself. That's the biggest thing, because you know what you need.
Exactly. Advocate for yourself. Keep fighting the good fight, because you're worth it.
You are, yes.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Makenzie. And your insights have been very valuable. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Well, that's all for today. Thank you for listening. And a big thank you to our guest, Makenzie Lopez, for sharing her story about her service dog in training and also her journey with trichotillomania. If you'd like some more information on trichotillomania, or would like some support, there's a few websites you can check out. You can check out www.bfrb.org/support groups. So there's some support groups there for you. You can also check out www.therecoveryvillage.com/mental health/trichotillomania. Also, you can check out adaa.org website or www.trichstop.com. That's TRICHSTOP.com. Thank you all for joining us. If you'd like to send some love, please do by hitting those like, subscribe, follow buttons. And if you'd like to continue this discussion, why not comment below or check us out on one of our social medias. We are at Mindful Pause Podcast everywhere. I've been your host, Laura Mudge, and you've been listening to the Mindful Pause Podcast, the most awesome podcast on the internet, spreading awareness about mental health and service dogs. Take care.